Vladimir Putin won the presidential election in Russia by a large margin. Okay, huge margin. All right. Uh, the presidential election in Russia was predicted from the start. It was no secret that Vladimir Putin was going to win. And it was no secret that the election that was held from the 15th to the 17th across Russia, including the Russian territories, was heavily influenced by what's going on in Ukraine and what's happening between Russia, Ukraine, and NATO. So Vladimir Putin won over, I believe it was over 88, 87% of the total vote. 70+% of the electorate came out. Vladimir Putin actually did better in the territories that have been supposedly stolen from Ukraine, if you listen to the Western mainstream media, but in places like Donetsk, the people came out in droves for Vladimir Putin. And so the election of Vladimir Putin, of course, was no surprise, no shock, really. But what should come as a surprise is the context from which this comes out of, this victory comes out of. In particular, the fact that over the last several weeks, we've had, especially Emmanuel Macron, French president, talk about over and over again sending troops to Ukraine in order to fight Russia being a possibility. And over the course of this period, the last several weeks, we've also seen attacks on Belgorod. We've seen a step up in the campaign to try to smear Vladimir Putin and try to undermine the political process there. Of course, you had the whole Navalny incident where Alexei Navalny died. And now there is an attempt to resurrect the mightily defeated opposition to Vladimir Putin, or at least the Western-backed opposition to Putin. All of this was happening, and yet the election went off without a hitch, no problems. There were international observers, some of them friends of mine, who went there, Dan Kovalek and others, who validated and verified the results of this election. And we've had something shocking happen, okay? We have had the Western mainstream media come out of this with a newfound degree of awareness about what the situation is for Russia and why Vladimir Putin is here to stay. Before we get to that, I want to play you friend of the show, Scott Ritter. He did a report for Sputnik because I think this is where we need to start. Vladimir Putin's election is not just a victory for Russia and the Russian people because it was their will. They voted for Putin and Putin won dramatically. But it was also a victory for the multipolar world, and that Russia's future within this multipolar world is massively important. It is incredibly important, if not the most important in many areas and degrees, especially when it comes to this valiant effort to stave off and beat back the NATO advance, the unipolar advance, the imperial advance of the collective West. So here's what Scott Ritter had to say. I think this is a good segue into what we're going to get into, the fact that now we see the Western mainstream media catching up.
Now, what can we expect going forward? I think if you take a look at the lead up to this election, the Russian government was in the process of redefining Russia. We had a new foreign policy passed last summer that, categorized Russia as a major civilization of significance, that Russia had a goal of being self-sufficient, that Russia would never again allow itself to be dragged down in the dark abyss that existed in the 1990s. This is a new Russia. Now, is Russia just going to continue to sustain the same policies over the course of the next 6 years? Probably not. Look, Vladimir Putin is 71 years old. He's healthy, he's vibrant, and no one questions his fitness to continue to rule. And he'll probably be just as fit to rule in 6 years. But then what? Does he seek another 6-year election, or does he seek to transition to the next generation of Russian leaders? And I believe that that's what we're going to see in the next 6 years. We're going to see a Russia in transition, a Russia that continues to redefine itself, both in terms of how it interfaces with the world. We're talking about a multipolar world, not just, it's a brave new world. Russia is a leader in the BRICS movement. Russia is the chairman of the BRICS movement. We see a vibrant Russian economy that's going to redefine how it integrates with the global economy. I think you're going to see Vladimir Putin overseeing a more vibrant Russia, a Russia that's looking forward, a Russia that redefines itself, a Russia that introduces new blood into the political mix. It's going to be an exciting time for Russia, and the Russians are excited about it. And that's why so many of them went to the polls to vote for this president, not because it was just a vote in support of Vladimir Putin, but the most important part, it was a vote in support of Russia. Now,
So that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly right. This is what Vladimir Putin's leadership means to Russia. It means coming out of the catastrophe that was the fall of the Soviet Union, coming out of that nearly decade-long period of disaster where Russia was at its most indignified and oppressed position, and then coming out of that over the last 2 decades and surging forward in a recovery of the economy, lifting the standards of living for the vast majority of people, and then also embarking on a campaign of defending Russia's sovereignty in a period where it has never been under threat any more than now, where NATO is literally threatening World War III on a regular basis, and the conflict in Ukraine could not be any more emblematic of this. So Russia now is not just defending Russia, it's defending the entire multipolar world from which it leads, in which it takes a leadership position within. And the economy is a very good point. And I just want to bring this up really quick. I'm not going to read this article in full, but here you have China learning lessons. You have Ding Yifan, who's a senior development at the Center of the State Council in the Taihe Institute in China, saying that there are 4 counter-sanction strategies that China can learn from Russia. So this is an excerpt, and I'll leave it in the show notes. This is an excerpt of an article written by this professor on what China can learn from Russia. So here you see that Russia's success is bigger than Russia, is much bigger than Russia. And that's why the Russian people in particular have voted for Vladimir Putin in such a wide margin, such wide numbers. Now, I want to show you how, while Scott Ritter, friend of the show, a superb geopolitical analyst, understands this, in their own crude and maybe distorted way, the mainstream media is starting to understand this. And here in particular, I want to bring up a few articles. For one, here you have the Washington Post. Now, Belgorod has been pummeled, has been attacked. All right, and this was written on the eve of the election, as the eve of the votes being cast. And here you have in Belgorod, the Russian city hit hardest by the war, Putin is still running strong. Now, mind you, Ukrainian forces, as well as so-called armed groups affiliated, they say, with Kiev, have been attacking Belgorod for many months now, all throughout this conflict. And of course, Belgorod is Russian territory. So here I'm just going to read a bit of this because it shows how even in their direct encounters with the people in Belgorod, the Russians, they are in complete support of Vladimir Putin. For most Russian voters, Putin's 2-year-old war in Ukraine remains largely unseen, except on state-controlled television or social media. But in Belgorod, a regional capital near the Ukrainian border, they feel the war firsthand as it faces near daily attacks. For 4 days this week, the city's air defenses struggled to intercept barrages of rockets and explosive drones. They say struggled, but they were intercepted. While east and south of Belgorod, the Russian army battled anti-Kremlin militias, which mounted assaults along the border, aiming to portray Putin as unable to protect his country as he prepares to claim a 5th term in office. So, mind you, Russia wiped those forces off the map. That happened really soon after the election. There's little sign that this effort is succeeding. So this is the important part. And for many residents, such attacks only deepen their support for Putin and drive home the narrative, they say a false narrative from the Russian government, that Russians are victims in the war, not the perpetrators. I mean, how just absolutely disgusting do you have to be in the Washington Post to write about this conflict in this way? But we should not be surprised. So cities across Ukraine are bombarded far more than Belgorod with Russian weapons that are far more powerful, including ballistic and hypersonic missiles. So there you go. They're saying that resulting civilian casualties are far higher. Which one is it? Usually it's Russian forces, and I'll show you later. This is the case. Russian forces are the ones who are losing the most. Anyway, we go on. This is the conversation, some of the conversations they had at the Washington Post with people in Belgorod, Russians in Belgorod. So they said Yana and Mikhail Mikachuk were getting ready to leave their home to vote on Friday morning when their living room erupted in a cloud of dust and glass as a rocket exploded next to their apartment building. These you-know-whats are hammering us, but they can't scare me. I'll just make myself wake up again tomorrow and go and vote for Putin, said Yana. The drama of the morning was behind them, and they said, Putin loves his country. He does everything for us. He raised the country up from the ground. So that's definitive proof. They are proving the point that Scott Ritter and I make all the time on this program. Even as residents of Graveron, a border town, started to evacuate in Belgorod, closed schools, restaurants, and shops, the voting continued, part of an effort by officials to show the situation under control. So there you have it. They're only voting because the government wants to show that things are under control, not because people want to vote, even though they just said that there are people who want to vote despite the war. Today and throughout the 3 days of voting, it's important for us to show the whole world our unity, said the governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov. So the neighbor, Lola Muslimova, said she planned to vote for Putin. I don't see a better candidate than our current president. He is managing the situation the best he can. In Ukraine, they're all brainwashed, and the West is pressuring us hard as they can. So here's more. So a medic in Belgorod's territorial defense forces wearing a mask said the attacks made him more motivated to fulfill civic duty. I was never really a political person. I never voted before, speaking on anonymity because he was not authorized to talk to news media. But now I'm going out to vote out of principle. So, according to a member of Belgorod City Council, Vadim Rodchenko, the effect is the opposite. Ukraine's strategy to so-called disrupt the vote and stoke anger at Moscow. When Russians are faced with terrorist activities, they do not give up. And as a border city that has repelled external attacks since history or throughout history, there is a sense in Belgorod that we have a whole country behind us. It's genetic. So they're literally admitting, the Washington Post, that Vladimir Putin has support in Belgorod in a massive way. And mind you, the Washington Post wants to do everything it can to show that Russia does not have support. They're still painting this election, they're still painting the Russian government in this light, that this was all staged, that the Russian people did not have a choice, that they are all brainwashed. That's how we are here. That's what we are hearing from the Western mainstream media all the time. So here is Politico. Politico also had an interesting opinion piece after the election. Putin's going nowhere. The West needs to get a grip. Don't think social media memes or clever stunts will topple Putin. And here you go. Here's the kicker. Only a defeat in Ukraine can do that. And so if it's by any estimation, such a conclusion should garner, we should be aware that that conclusion means that Putin really is going nowhere because Ukraine cannot win this conflict. So here, wishing something were true doesn't make it so. This is Jamie Detmer of Politico Europe. He's the opinion editor. He said, for the past 2 years, we've had a plethora of predictions suggesting Russian President Vladimir Putin's days are numbered. Russians will turn on him, or that he'll be ousted in a Kremlin coup by oligarchs and Russia's elite, now targeted by Western sanctions and angry at their frozen overseas asset. Even Mikhail Kasyanov, Putin's prime minister from 2000 to 2004, had confidently predicted that the president's grip on power could slip abruptly. In 3 or 4 months, I believe there will be a crucial change. That's what he said back in 2022. Another recurring narrative is that Putin's afflicted with a fatal malady. He has been sick for a long time. He has cancer. I think he will die very quickly. Hope very soon. That was the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, Kirill Budanov. So here we have him secure 87% of the vote, and he's massively popular. So here they say, okay, the opposition's coming back. You have Yulia Navalny, the widow of this U.S. opposition leader, saying, we will win. But when? He asks, when? So now we have the fact there he's lamenting, right? He talks about how Putin is now saying Navalny's name because the Russian opposition is so weak, right? There is no innovative geniuses coming around the bend when it comes to Russia's minute and tiny pro-Western opposition. There's no clever memes that are going to help, right? They tried. There was a noon against Putin protest that went nowhere to try to force people to vote another direction or convince them, as they would say. So none of this is working, okay? None, but they do offer, this is what is so interesting, okay? What is so interesting about this is that there isn't cooperation amongst Russia's opposition. And what's so interesting is that they are calling for war, right? Not just Russia's opposition, so-called pro-Western opposition, but this peace in and of itself is saying, however violent or peaceful, Russia's opposition seems an irrelevance no matter how much it's talked up by commentators in the West. Russia's pro-democratic opposition was largely a spent force even before 2022 of February, said the Center for European Policy Analysis. And so while many of these individuals continue to fight abroad and play important roles in helping refugees in Ukraine and smuggling intelligence, what does all this mean for the West, given that it's so weak? It means that Russia's defeat in Ukraine is the only realistic goal. This is what they're saying. This is what the opinion editor at Politico is saying about Putin, that Putin is so strong. They have to admit that he is so supported in Russia that the only way to defeat Putin would be to defeat Russia in Ukraine. Now, that is that is a pipe dream. That is a real pipe dream, okay? For such a victory to be achieved, the West has to gird itself, he says, accelerate weapons provision and military assistance, and help Ukraine weather the soon-to-come Russian offensives that will target likely Kharkov and Odessa, as well as build up for another heave and try to push. So basically, they had to prepare for another heave and push Russia out. So that's it. If Russia loses, it will undergo a transformation inside. If it wins, it will dominate Europe. They're literally saying the quiet part out loud of what they have wanted to do since the very beginning. But now they're saying it not with the confidence of a superpower that is ready to take on the Russian government and its military. They're saying it really as a defeated force. And it gets worse because it isn't just that they know the situation is much better for Vladimir Putin than they would like to admit, the collective West. That's not all. It's also the fact that they are, and I'm not going to read this whole piece, but they're also admitting more and more that the battlefield situation is just untenable, that it is not going well. Symbolism or strategy, says the New York Times, Ukraine battles to retain small gains. Retain small gains. Despite American doubts, Ukrainians say that defending places with little strategic value is worth the cost in casualties and weapons because the attacking Russians pay an even higher price. What did I say? Which one is it? Is it that Russians are imposing massive casualties, military and civilian, on Ukraine? Or is it that Ukraine is inflicting massive casualties onto Russia? You never really know with the Western mainstream media. It could be either one. It could be both at the same time. So this is where their narrative begins to collapse. So I'm not going to read this whole piece. I'm actually going to go to a part that I highlighted here. Okay. So where's that piece that I highlighted? Oh, it looks like I got unhighlighted. So here we go. So we talk about Robottino, right? Robottino. So this small village, this small city, has been subject to just intense fighting. And Ukraine has treated it like Bakhmut and Avdiivka, which Ukraine lost in both regards. So anyway, Robotyne, which had a pre-war population of 500 people, is now in ruins. Throughout the war, American officials have repeatedly raised concerns that Ukraine was holding out too long in defending such places, committing soldiers and ammunition to cling to devastated towns with little strategic value. But for Ukraine, the area around Robotyne remains worth fighting for, at least for now. At some point, symbolic becomes strategic, says Yuri Sak, a former advisor to the Minister of Defense, said of the fighting. Defending the gains of the offensive, he said, is important for morale. It's important for the support of the population. It's important for the inner belief in our potential to win. So they're talking about the symbolic being now strategic. The combat is also more costly in casualties for Russians and Ukrainians in their defensive positions, Sak said. As long as the calculus continues, it supports holding the ground. It's war, so casualties are inevitable on both sides. That's what they think. This is what they truly think, despite the fact that here's the next three kind of reality check paragraphs, because they're about to contradict themselves. Russia is now on the offensive along the entire front line, which stretches in a 600-mile-long crescent from the Russian border, northeastern Ukraine, to the southern Dnieper River. The Kremlin's military has been using its advantage in ammunition, manpower, and aviation. There's a reality check right there. Russia has swelled the ranks of its army by deploying squads of former convicts, they say, as if that's all that's joining the Russian military. It's buying artillery shells, missiles, and exploding drones from DPRK and Iran to help replenish supplies. Its planes avoid Ukrainian air defenses by dropping bombs from a safe distance that glide to their targets, dropping nearly 3,500 glide bombs that Ukraine's military has admitted. Moscow's electronic warfare instruments jam signals and scramble coordinates for Ukraine's satellite-guided weapons. The result has been a grinding advance that in February pushed Ukraine out of Avdiivka. Since then, Russia has been attacking with a combination of ground assaults and aerial bombing at 7 points along the front, according to Ukraine's General Staff headquarters. Russian forces are now pushing through pine forests to the city of Kupiansk in the Oskil River, seeking to reverse gains Ukraine made in the counteroffensive in the fall 2022. So what does that all point to? The symbolic is now strategic, meaning they're doomed. Ukraine is doomed on the battlefield. They want to continue to say that Russia's inflicting or being inflicted upon it more casualties, more losses, that Ukraine is holding on. But then they will say just straight up that they are losing, and they're losing badly. But it gets even worse than this, okay? It really is a total collapse happening in Ukraine while Vladimir Putin's position couldn't be any stronger. Here you have Ukrainska Pravda, okay, Ukrainian media saying that Zelensky's servant of the people faction is close to disorganization due to a lack of motivation. And what they are saying here is that de jure currently has 235 MPs. This is Zelensky's party. Around 170, 180 of them regularly attend parliamentary meetings and participate in voting. The rest have either openly split off, like the 17 MPs in Razumkov's group, or routinely miss meetings. The Pravda source noted that the Ukrainian president's office and parliament are at odds. Here's some quotes. There's a misunderstanding between the president's office and the parliament. The office despises the parliament. They think the servants will vote for whatever comes up since Zelensky brought them to power. Yes, he did. So what? We've endured 2 full years of full-scale war. Therefore, the old interaction model no longer works. We need to change something. Everyone is tired of the war. Secondly, many strict restrictions have been imposed, such as a ban on foreign business trips. Thirdly, MPs have that means they want to run away. Thirdly, MPs have no influence on the state of affairs and therefore on the state's affairs, and therefore no longer see their role in the parliament and the point of being there. That is a huge one. They no longer have an influence on the state's affairs. Why? Well, Zelensky would say it's martial law and they need to consolidate. But the truth is that Ukraine has been turned into, and it has always been since the coup in 2014, has been transformed into a literal puppet state. Essentially, these members of parliament are claiming that Zelensky has total control and that they don't even really belong. They don't have any reason to believe that they need to participate. Okay, and here's a quote from one of the servants' MPs. Relatively speaking, individual MPs are saying things like, "Let me go. I have been offered a managerial position at a factory and a salary of $8,000. I need to provide for my family and somehow grow on a personal level." I have heard such conversations many times. So the government is just, it's not a popular government. That's why they refuse to hold elections. Putin held an election during wartime. Ukraine not holding elections during wartime. And there is many reasons for this, but the biggest one is that Zelensky would not be voted back. Zelensky would not win, lest the United States would have to manipulate the results, and that would look incredibly bad, especially when it comes to Ukraine's golden boy image that they have tried to maintain, albeit with many failures all along the way. But you not only have this, okay, you have Ukraine just is has no friends. Okay, Ukraine is not just in a position where its leadership. Okay, and so here is the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Mr. Danilov. Okay, he is a rabid. He is a fascist. This gentleman is a fascist. This is why he has a blurred background, because you probably would see right sector and all kinds of other paraphernalia of the NAZI variety. But Mr. Danilov has many times shown why Ukraine doesn't have any friends. And here is why. So once again, Ukraine, Alexei Danilov has lashed out at China. And what did he say to Ukrainian media? And this is commenting on Beijing's proposal for peace talks with Russia. So as for Li Hui, this is the envoy, I want to remind, no one will decide our fate without us. We will not allow anyone, no country without us, without the will of our people, decide anything there. If someone thinks that we should get rid of our territory, get rid of our sovereignty, give yours. We are not going to give ours to anyone, and we will not. I don't understand who can take our territories, our lands, and throw them away like this. Because to some, Hui, he vulgarly distorted his surname. I apologize, surname is inserted there or someone else there. It seemed that they should decide this. It will be decided by the people of Ukraine, led by the president. Our position is quite simple and clear. The Russian troops must leave Ukraine. After that, we will start talking about something. So Danilov essentially insulted China's envoy, Li Hui, and there are some rumors that he insulted him in a manner that, if you look at a translation in Ukrainian or Russia, it meant something very vulgar. He said his name in a different pronunciation, in a Russian-Ukrainian pronunciation that could very well mean, let's just say, a body part I will not name on Twitter. I mean, on YouTube. All right. He's done this before, though. Okay. So he's done this before. Here he is, from months back. The people of India and China, Asians in general, have less intellectual capacity, less humanity, less culture than we Ukrainians do. Russians are Asians, and Asians have a way inferior and way less culture than us. They have less humanity, too. That's our key difference from the Russian. That's what Alexei Danilov said. Okay, the head of the Defense Council of Ukraine. This was back in 2023 in the fall. So Ukraine doesn't have any friends. It has been isolated. It has been destroyed. It has been made a pro-Western puppet. It has a government that's wildly unpopular. It has a battlefield situation that is deteriorating. And essentially, NATO's plans is, we're going to send troops, we're going to undermine Putin, we're going to weaken Russia. It's all failed. They have failed dramatically. It's over. It is really game over for this broader plot to contain and weaken Russia. That is what Russia's recent presidential election really signifies. It is a mighty and growing power in a multipolar world. It's not going to lose in Ukraine. NATO has no chance of defeating it. And we are going to continue to see Russia's leadership develop as conditions change. We will see political changes in Russia. That is what makes Russia different than, let's say, the United States. There will be political changes in Russia. It may not be regime change, but Russia will change and alter its politics depending on what is best for its sovereignty. And that's what we have seen over the course of the last 2 decades, and that will continue from here on out. NATO has lost, and it's going to lick its wounds in the most violent of ways. So get ready. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.